They really are nice people, I agreed with my wife, using a casual phrase, knowing it wasn't the best English. And I'm sure their children are well behaved. They have 2 children, corrected my wife. I thought he said 3, I replied. No, she mentioned 2. I must have misunderstood, I admitted. But I could have sworn he said 3 children earlier today. They're staying with his Aunt Jenny, my wife clarified. I thought he said they were with his mother-in-law, I interjected. My wife gave me a serious look. Men may not remember details about children well, but everyone knows the difference between an aunt and a mother-in-law. But don't you think they're nice? My wife asked. Yes, of course, I replied, though they seem a bit confused about their children. That's not a nice thing to say, my wife remarked, and I couldn't argue. Below us, we could see towns and villages, along with ridges, hills, forests, and plains, all mixed together in a big, quiet sea of green sunlight. Standing in that high place, it was silent around us, like a peaceful Sunday that made us listen for church bells, even though we knew we were too far away to hear them. Above us were light clouds casting shadows on our heads and small patches of shade on the wide land at the foot of the mountain. Is this your view? Mrs. Breed asked after a moment. You're so kind to share it with us. We lay down on the grass, and Mr. Breed started talking in a soft voice, as if he felt the calm of the place. He had paddled a canoe in his younger days, he said, and he knew every river and stream in the large area we could see. He found landmarks and showed us where the Passaic and the Hackensack rivers flowed. Even though we couldn't see them, they were hidden behind big ridges that looked like waves of green to us. On the other side of those hills and rises are many villages, he said. It's a bit like looking at people. Sometimes we get so far above others that we only see one side of them. This kind of talk was much better than the gossip of Tab and Hugenkamp or the majors' talk about stocks. My wife and I exchanged looks. When I climbed the Matterhorn, Mr. Breed began. Why, dear, his wife interrupted. I didn't know you climbed the Matterhorn. It was 5 years ago, Mr. Breed quickly said. I didn't tell you. It was a bit dangerous. Well, it didn't look anything like this. A cloud passed overhead, making a big shadow on the field where we were lying. The shadow moved over the top of the mountain and then appeared far below us as a small dark spot, moving eastward over the golden green. My wife and I looked at each other again. Somehow, that shadow stayed with us. As we walked back home, the Breeds walked together, and my wife and I walked together. Do you think, she asked me, a man would climb the Matterhorn in the first year of marriage? I don't know, dear, I said, not really answering. This isn't my first year of marriage, and I wouldn't climb it for anything. You know what I mean, she said. I did. After supper that night, we had our main meal at midday at Jacobus's. I walked down the long porch to where Mr. Breed was calmly smoking at the other end. Halfway there, I met Major Halkett. Your friend, he nodded towards Mr. Breed, seems like a strange fellow. He told me he's not working and is looking for a place to invest his money. I've been telling him about a big opportunity to buy stock in the Capitoline Trust Company, starting next month with $4 million in capital. Let's wait and think about it, he says. Wait. I said, this is a chance of a lifetime. Oh, let it wait, he says. I can't figure out what's going on with him. I'm not sure how well he knows what he's doing, Major, I said, and continued on to Mr. Breed's end of the porch. But I was troubled. The major couldn't affect the sale of even one share of Capitoline Company stock, but it was a great investment opportunity, especially for someone with a few $1,000s. Maybe it wasn't odd that Mr. Breed wasn't investing, but it added to the other strange things. That evening, when I went upstairs, my wife was finishing putting her hair up, something every married man knows about. When she was done, I spoke up. "I talked with Mr. Breed," I said, "and he was very open. You were right about the children. I must have misunderstood him. There are only two. As for the Matterhorn story, he didn't realize how dangerous it was until he was too far to turn back. He didn't tell her because he had left her here, and—" "Left her here!" my wife exclaimed. "I spent the whole afternoon with her, sewing. She told me he left her in Geneva, came back, took her to Basel, and their baby was born there." "She's sure?" I asked her. "Maybe I got confused when he said she was on this side of the ocean," I said sarcastically. "Oh, you poor thing. Did I misunderstand you?" my wife said. But Mrs. Tabb said she didn't know how much sugar he put in his coffee. That seems odd, doesn't it? It did seem odd. Very odd. The next morning, it was clear there was tension with the Breeds. They came to breakfast late, and the Biggleses quickly finished and left, followed by Miss Hugenkamp, who left a whole fish ball on her plate. We had already finished breakfast and discussed it, glad we hadn't taken sides without enough information. After breakfast, the men of the Jacobus house would usually go to smoke their pipes and cigars where they wouldn't bother the ladies. We sat under a grapevine-covered trellis that hadn't produced grapes in a long time. The leaves shielded us from view, as we overheard a serious conversation in the neglected flower garden beside the house. "I don't want to invade anyone's privacy," Mr. Jacobus said, "but I need to know who I have in my house. Now, what I want to ask you, and please don't take it personally, is, do you have your marriage license with you?" "No," we heard Mr. Breed reply. "Do you have yours?" I think it was a random question, but it revealed a lot. The major, he was a widower. Mr. Biggle and I exchanged looks. Mr. Jacobus, on the other side of the grapevine, looked uncertain, silent like us. "Where is your marriage license, reader? Do you know?" For men, not counting Mr. Breed, stood or sat on one side or the other of that grapevine, and not one of us knew where his marriage license was. Each of us had one. The major had 3. But where were they? Where is yours? In your best man's pocket? In a desk drawer? Or washed to a pulp in his white waistcoat? If white waistcoats are in fashion, washed out of existence. Do you know where it is? Unless you are one of those people who frame that interesting document and hang it on your living room wall. After an awful silence that seemed like 5 minutes, but was probably 30 seconds, Mr. Breed spoke up. "Mr. Jacobus, could you prepare your bill now and let me pay it? I'll be leaving on the 6 o'clock train. Also, please send the wagon for my luggage." "I didn't say I wanted you to leave," Mr. Jacobus started to say, but Mr. Breed cut him off. "Bring me your bill." "But," Mr. Jacobus protested, "if you're not, bring me your bill." Mr. Breed insisted. My wife and I went for our morning walk. But when we looked at our view, it felt like we could only see those hidden villages Mr. Breed had told us about, the other side of the hills and ridges that we couldn't see from lofty heights or from our own high opinions of ourselves. We meant to stay out until the Breeds had left, but we returned just in time to see Pete, Jacobus's helper, loading the Breed's luggage onto Jacobus's wagon. As we stepped onto the porch, Mrs. Breed came down, leaning on Mr. Breed's arm as if she were sick, and it was clear she had been crying. There were dark circles around her pretty black eyes. My wife took a step towards her. "Look at that dress, dear," she whispered. She never thought anything like this would happen when she put that on. It was a pretty, delicate dress with narrow stripes. Her hat matched, trimmed with the same maroon and white stripes, and she held a parasol that matched too. "She's worn a new dress twice a day," my wife said, "but that's the prettiest yet. Oh, somehow, I'm really sorry they're leaving." But they were leaving. They walked towards the steps. Mrs. Breed glanced at my wife, and my wife moved towards her. But Mrs. Breed turned sharply away, opening her parasol to shield her eyes from the sun. A shower of rice, half a pound of rice, fell over her pretty hat and dress, landing in a circle on the floor, outlining her skirt. It lay there, bright in the morning sun. Mrs. Breed was in my wife's arms, crying as if her young heart would break. "Oh, you poor, dear, silly children," my wife said, as Mrs. Breed sobbed on her shoulder. "Why didn't you tell us? We didn't want to look like a BBB bridal couple," Mrs. Breed sobbed. "We didn't know we'd have to tell such awful lies and get so mixed up." "Oh, dear, dear." Mr. Jacobus spoke up. "Pete, put those trunks back. These folks can stay as long as they want." Mr. Breed, he held out a big, rough hand. "I should have known better," he said. My last doubt about Mr. Breed disappeared as he shook that dirty hand like a gentleman. The two women walked towards our view, each with an arm around the other, united by a sudden sisterhood of sympathy. "Gentlemen," Mr. Breed said to Jacobus, Biggle, the Major, and me, "there's an inn down the street where they serve honest New Jersey beer. I understand the situation." The five of us walked down the street. The two women headed for the sunny slope where the sunlight lit up the hill. On Jacobus's porch lay a circle of rice grains. Two of Jacobus's pigeons flew down and picked up the shiny grains, making contented sounds deep in their throats.